Hey, Ninja Duck Bob here to discuss the Cyclone. First, want to open up saying I really appreciate the direction the Balance Council is going with the Cyclone, and kind of the direction of things that they try to do. I think the Cyclone that is in test right now has the potential to be less volatile. It lowers the skill floor for the Cyclone player and the opponent both because things die less quickly. Each cyclone deals less damage in a short amount of time, and it's not as devastating to lose one or two cyclones for the Terran side. It still maintains a decent skill ceiling as well with micro ability. It serves as a true core factory unit that provides some flexibility for factory based play by being made into a mobile generalist combat unit, which I believe is good and needed thing for Mech. But I do believe it still has some flaws. Mostly it seems only good when masked, which I don't really mind as a playstyle, but it would be nice for it to also mesh better with other mech units so it could be used in moderate numbers within a more interesting composition. It's difficult to balance for both counters and game stages, hence so many changes since its conception in the test form. Like right now, I believe it has like plus damage to mechanical instead of armored, and that just goes to show how difficult it is to balance it. But while still making it useful against like Zerg and such, which more testing needs to be done, of course. But with that said, I would like to present a version I worked on a long time ago for a mod that I worked on a long time ago that has much of the same goals as the current test version. I believe this version that I'm going to present is easier to balance while providing some more depth in some ways and fixing the flaws that I mentioned. And after explaining what's different about it, we can get into some demonstrations. So, three main things are different in addition to not having the speed upgrade. So, we're working with a consistent speed here, just so you know. First, it's given back a normal weapon with a low damage point that performs solidly in general combat and allows for bread and butter micro like standard kiting, stutter stepping, and focus fire. Those are some good core micro things that kind of avoid the issues that moving while firing has. Its normal weapon is also stronger against air units, so as to make it a comparable ground to air alternative to Vikings. All of that allows this version of the Cyclone in my mod to remain that core type of role as a generalist combat unit that Mech needs. Secondly, its lock-on attack is changed to be very long-ranged and long-lasting, but deals very low damage and has a minimum range as well, and that does a few interesting things. First, when units get too close, the Cyclone loses the lock-on, but then defaults to its stronger normal weapon, so opponents have an interesting choice in how to engage or if to engage, and it's not as punishing to the Cyclone player if the opponent catches up to them. Secondly, related to that, it allows cyclones to encourage the opponent to move their army, either engaging with the Terran army or moving away from the location, giving the Terran a little room to, for example, reposition tanks, especially when fighting lurkers or opposing tanks. But it does this without dealing a lot of damage up front, so the opponent has some time to react and decide, do I want to engage or do I want to fall back and try some other counter micro? And third, its typing is changed from armored to light to encourage a diversity in compositions. Mech has a lot of armored units already, so this allows Cyclone to tank damage for tanks and encourages more use of units like Colossi, even Adepts perhaps, and other light units in addition to the anti-armored units to use against Mech. So with all that explained, I'd like to get into some demonstrations. First, I want to mention that the demonstrations are simply to showcase the general design rather than the numbers for the stats. I believe there is room for this design of the Cyclone within the current test changes, but similarly to how the Balance Council considers groups of changes, the numbers are balanced around the changes as a whole in this mod. So you're going to see things like Hellions and armored type Hellbats that cost more minerals but have an upgrade that makes them tankier for combat. Tankier Zealots that have a lower attack speed. Adepts that have anti-light rail cannons that do better in combat but worse for worker harassment. Like Thors that are tanky and short range frontline buster units. tanks that have a damage point so they can actually waste shots, among other changes that amount to a lot of ideas here that this Cyclone is balanced around. So the numbers would likely look different in the actual game. Nevertheless, I don't think that means that the design of the specific Cyclone unit in this mod cannot have use within the context of the game as a whole. So enough rambling, and let's get into the demonstrations. Starting with Cyclones versus Zealots and Immortals here, just showcasing some of the basic micro, as well as the fact that you want to be careful what composition you choose against these as the opponent. Immortals aren't going to do well against light units, which these Cyclones are. But if you have enough Zealots, these Cyclones deal bonus to armored and not to light. So you can crowd them into a corner fairly easily. These Zealots are a little tankier and have less of an attack rate than Zealots in the actual game, so numbers would need to be adjusted for that accordingly if it was a balance issue, but this just kind of shows the concept of how you could use a lot of Zealots against this Cyclone. Or Adepts. This version of the Adept has an anti-light rail cannon, but Adepts in the actual game are still anti-light, so if it was going to be balanced around the Adept, then that would need to be kept in mind as well. But still, you get the idea. This is showcasing kind of showcasing the Disruptor in this mod as well, which has some shots that have little discharges that deal damage, as well as the Disruptor itself that does that. Just wanted to showcase that a little bit for fun. This is showing how the Cyclone can still do well against armored units here. These roaches are a little tankier, but they have less range and a bigger size, so less damage density. Regardless, against actual roaches in the game, you should do fine with this design of the Cyclone. However, just like with Zealots, Lings tend to do very well against this Cyclone. Like you can kind of kite with it, but because it doesn't have the problems with moving while firing, you can't just endlessly kill Zerglings as easily. You can back them into a corner here with the Zerglings fairly easily, and if you can imagine just surround micro, that would do quite well as well. This is showcasing the Cyclone's lock-on attack against the Thor here. And showing it doesn't do much damage if you just have one Cyclone. You're not going to do well. That kind of Buster Thor is going to do well against it. But that's just a showcase against quick units that have a little range. But with a lot of Cyclones, you can deal a decent amount of damage by stacking up those lock-ons, and you can keep following the units as well. And that'll let you do decently. But you do need a number of the Cyclones to be able to do that. You might want to use a few Cyclones to bait the opponent's army into your tanks with this version, or into your mines. This is not great micro on the Protoss side here, but you kind of get the concept of the kind of stuff you can do with them. This is kind of an ambitious part of the change where they have slightly more range than a tank. So in TVT, you can lock onto a tank there, and then the opponent can use their Cyclones to push your Cyclones away. So it kind of adds another chess piece dynamic to the TVT matchup there. And here we have it against air units, carriers here specifically. They do pretty well. These carriers have less interceptor slots, but they can also build tiny little Corsairs that deal some splash damage. That's another little change in this mod. But the it would be a similar concept against carriers in the actual game. Here we are just showing that, oh, you might want less carriers and maybe add some anti-light units in here, some kind of counter to the cyclones in order to deal with them. And so that works out there for the Protoss. Yeah, just showing again, if you try to just target the adepts instead with the cyclones here, how they do. The carriers can still do a decent job here because of how many cyclones that the adepts killed. It's a little closer though. Here we have the importance of positioning. So if you have cyclones in front with this cyclone Hellion army, and these Hellions are also a little tankier because of an upgrade and a little more expensive as well, but theoretically and then in the actual game, if you used Hellions, it would be a similar concept. But if you put the Hellions in front here, they should do better, letting the cyclones be in the back and taking out more of those Marines off the bat, with the cyclones doing much better against like marauders and such. Here is Hellbat Hellion Cyclone against the Disruptors and the Adepts and a few Zealots. The Hellbats are also a little tankier armor-wise there, but they're armored, so they don't take bonus against light. But this kind of fight can go fairly evenly. I had times where both sides won this fight. And here we have Cyclone Hellion Hellbat against Cyclone Hellion Hellbat, just showing just the interesting dynamics between the different ones you can have. Like, do you have more Hellbats or Hellions? The side that loses here actually had more Hellbats, which you would think would do better in straight-on A-move combat, but they didn't. For this one, we've got Hellion Hellbat Cyclone against a Protoss Stalker Colossus army. The Stalker Colossus army is not going to do very well. Again, my micro for the Protoss here isn't great, but it's just generally not going to do very well against Cyclones. But if you have, you know, this Adept Immortal army, the Immortals will go ahead and clean up those armored Hellbats in the front, and the Adepts will do fairly well against the Cyclones and kind of even against the Hellions. So if you have the right composition, you can counter the playstyle decently. You can have somewhat more even fights here as well. So say you did build Colossi, they're not entirely useless. They will do fairly well against Cyclones, but you still have to watch out. But this fight is fairly even. It could go either way. Next we have Roach Hydra against Cyclone Hellbat Hellion. And yeah, it's a fairly even fight with that as well. But this shows that you do still need to do a little micro sometimes. This is the same fight, but we're going to micro the Hellions this time to target down those Hydras. And that should allow the Terran to do much better here. Yeah. So you can see how micro differences help there. And yeah, that's all I have for demonstrations here. If you like it, then yeah, I would like you to kind of spread the word. If you want to try this Cyclone out for yourself, you can go to the arcade and go to Project Justice and go to the Project Justice unit tester. Full credit to the original creators of the unit tester. You can go and create the mod or create the lobby here and just go ahead and start game. Or you can go over to Melee and do a create with mod, not Big Game Hunters. Pick a map, create with mod, and you can search for Project Justice And I believe it's this one. Yeah, Project Justice Alpha. You can create the lobby there. And yep, that's all I've got. Hope that you enjoyed and have a good one.